I'm Samantha Engel.
And I'm Aaron Gullius, and you're listening to Great Lakes Lore.
It was a crappy day today, wasn't it?
It was awful. I know we start every episode with the weather, but...
It's the weather. It's the season to complain about the weather constantly.
It was awful. It's April 4th as we're recording this, and it was just gray, and I looked out the window, and there's like this sleet coming down, and then it settled down into rain, and
we had a lot of rain, and then every once in a while you looked out and there were like those giant wet snowflakes just falling with the rain. And I wore a blazer today, 3/4 sleeve, and I was just like freezing in my office all day long.
It was
unfortunate.
Dreadful.
Bad wardrobe choice.
So today we're going to be looking at the Great Lakes. Well, we're going to be looking at one of the Great Lakes. It's, I think, kind of a first for us. We've talked about a lot of things happening around the Great Lakes, but I don't think we've yet focused on a mystery of one of the Great Lakes itself.
A maritime mystery.
A maritime mystery. They are. You'd think we would have done that by now, but no, we've done other things. So we're going to be looking at some stuff about Lake Ontario. And just to be clear, we're not going to be providing a blow-by-blow account of every mystery, disaster, or mysterious disaster that occurred. Rather, we're going to be, in typical Great Lakes lore fashion, interrogating some stories and delving into the facts behind them as best we can. So if we don't mention your favorite Lake Ontario mystery, it's not because we don't know about it, it's because we had to make some choices so we're not here for the next 5 hours. So some of the stories we're going to be looking at today involve disappearing ships, and I think there's a phantom fleet. So vanishing ships, ghost ships, why do they seem to be more fascinating and popular? These sinkings of ships, why is this more evocative and out in the sort of legendary culture than train wrecks or car crashes?
I think people romanticize maritime things so much, and especially in the Great Lakes region with the Great Lakes. I mean, in some ways, I think it harkens back to like a bygone era, or something like that. But also, I mean, there are still, huge cargo ships that are going through the Great Lakes today. And I just think it's something special about this region. Most areas don't have these giant inland seas surrounding them. I have a little story that I wanted to throw in here. I did a year at the University of Kentucky. And while I was down there, someone said something, and I was like, well, yeah, like, you haven't ever visited an old lighthouse? And they looked at me like, no, I have not. And then it hit me that, like, I mean, obviously, I know that most states don't have lighthouses all over their shoreline, but or have a shoreline. But it was like one of those, like, you had to be taken out of your element to realize how special your element was. And so I think because of that, shipwrecks on the Great Lakes really, they hold a special place in the minds of Great Lakes region residents.
Even beyond that, ocean-going folklore, like on the salt seas. Boy, that sounds like an old-timey way to say something. On the salt sea. You hear that phrase in folk songs a lot, but there's a lot of folk songs about sailing ships, and a lot of them have supernatural overtones to them. And then you've got other folk songs that are basically work songs on sailing ships. So there's a
shanties.
Shanties, yeah. And
shanties are super popular with the young crowd right now.
I don't care about the young crowd.
I'm just saying, like, we got to get our shanty plug in, man.
I've been listening to shanties when the young crowd were the preschool crowd. So
now you're a grumpy old man.
I'm not a grumpy old man. I'm just a shanty guy from way back, and I don't like being trivialized by people on YouTube.
What's trivializing you?
You don't see as much folklore about cars or folk songs about cars or trains.
There's like a lot of legends and lore that surround seafaring because it was such a dangerous thing to do for so long, and people would set sail and they'd be gone for months and months and years at a time. So you had all these your superstitions and the things that you did and whatever.
Of all the mysteries of the seas, one of the most popular of modern times is the Bermuda Triangle and other areas that have become known as zones of mystery. The Bermuda Triangle was first widely discussed by a writer named Vincent Gaddis in a 1964 article for Argosy magazine. Argosy was one of these 1960s adventure magazines that had all sorts of stories about interesting, mysterious things like the Bermuda Triangle. But it was popularized more widely by Charles Berlitz's 1974 book about it. And then there was a 1977 episode of the series In Search Of, and a really, really bad 1978 Mexican-Italian horror movie, which, if you haven't seen, I completely urge you to see. So in the 1970s, this isn't the place to talk about it, but there's a massive paranormal boom in the 1970s. It is the paranormal decade for a number of reasons. And the Bermuda Triangle caught the attention of the public. This area in the Atlantic where ships vanished, where planes vanished, where mysterious things happened. So it shouldn't be a surprise that other regions with large bodies of water and lots of transportation on them might try to get in on the action.
And Jay Gurley did just that in 1977. He published a book called The Great Lakes Triangle, and it is described on the cover as a chilling chronicle of unexplained disasters even more bizarre than those of the Bermuda Triangle. It doesn't end with an exclamation point, but we both thought it seemed appropriate that it should. When you're that inflammatory, you need the proper punctuation to accompany it. But between the blurb and the title, it's pretty clear that Gurley's book is trading on the 1970s popularity of the Bermuda Triangle. This isn't a criticism of ours. It's very smart marketing to tie it in. And so Gurley's book catalogs a vast number of happenings from across the entire Great Lakes region, which isn't really triangular. He just really wanted to get that shape in
Anything can be a triangle if you make it big enough. Right. You can close anything in a triangle.
Yeah, and Wisconsin can be a mitten.
No, it can't.
We love you, Wisconsin. There are, however, other more triangular zones within the Great Lakes region, which researchers have investigated. There is a Lake Michigan Triangle, for example, and maybe we'll cover that at some point down the road. But there's also a triangular area known as the Marysburgh Vortex, which is part of Lake Ontario near the northeastern end of the lake. And that's what we're going to be focusing on today.
So this is really the first time where we're really hitting New York as
it is
as a
welcome
Great Lakes
New
state.
York.
Welcome, and Ontario is
yes.
sort of being brought into the fold for the first time. Hello neighbors over there across the Straits of Detroit. Then in 1980, a few years after Gurley's book, Hugh Cochran published the extravagantly titled Gateway to Oblivion. While Gurley spends just a brief amount of time on Lake Ontario-based incidents, Cochran devotes nearly his entire book to the Marysburgh Vortex, a triangular area whose 3 points are Mexico Bay, which is near Oswego, New York, Wolf Island, which sits at the mouth of the St. Lawrence River, and a place called Point Petra in Prince Edward County, Ontario. Hugh Cochran I couldn't find an obituary. He might still be on the scene. He was a freelance writer from Ontario who, according to the biography on his book jacket, always the most credible source for information about any writer, has, quote, years of experience with UFOs and psychic phenomenon, end quote, and has collected a great deal of evidence about the Marysburgh Vortex, a term he coined. We weren't able to find much information about Cochran, leading us to wonder if perhaps he did his freelance writing under a different name. Now, what I did find is that he, or someone from Toronto with the same name, did write a letter to the editor of Popular Mechanics in 1996 to complain about the metric system and to reassure Americans that they were correct to stick to the old imperial measurements. I choose to believe that was the guy who wrote this book. That's just what I choose to believe.
So in Gateway to Oblivion, Cochran argues that the Marysburgh Vortex is a weird, if not deadly, anomaly that none of the other Great Lakes possesses. He claims that the weirdness here, quote, outranks anything found in the Bermuda Triangle, the Hoodoo Sea, or another so-called zone of mystery anywhere in the world. Why? Because, and Cochran's description is pretty extreme, so it's worth quoting in full, It appears to be the focus of an unknown, invisible vortex of forces that not only erupts intermittently throughout the waters, but at times spews out an invisible cloak to encompass and cause disasters in other parts of the Great Lakes, the regions surrounding them, and even the skies above. So this vortex spews out its anomalous forces.
It does. It spews them out.
To cause accidents and chaos everywhere.
It makes sense to me.
It's like the gateways of hell under Buffy the Vampire Slayer's high school.
Without question. Now, I've got a question for you, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but I am truly ignorant, and maybe you aren't as ignorant as I am. What is the Hoodoo Sea?
No idea.
Okay. Answers on a postcard, folks. What is the Hoodoo Sea? Send us your...
Did you look it up before you put it in the outline? Oh.
No. I choose to remain ignorant of the Hoodoo Sea. For one reason, I have a feeling that the word hoodoo is some sort of term we're not supposed to use anymore.
Well, yes, that's why. No, I'm looking this up right now. It's a nickname for the Bermuda Triangle, so clearly a very offensive term.
I don't think Cochrane knows that the Hoodoo Sea and the Bermuda Triangle are the same thing. That's hilarious.
Unless it's one of those, like, because the way he uses parentheses, the Bermuda Triangle, or not parentheses, commas, like he's saying this is another name for it, which we definitely should not be using in the 21st century. I
don't know. I don't read it like that.
No, I mean, I don't know. I mean, he could be you read the book, so it could be.
No, I read the book, and I think he's confused.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll go with that.
We'll find other examples of his confusion and error as we go. Mystery solved.
Yes. All right. So in order to prove or illustrate the power of the forces inside of the Marysburgh Vortex, Cochrane brings in a number of disasters from the eastern end of Lake Ontario. Gateway to Oblivion is detail-rich, but it is very clearly committed to anomalous explanations. It's these forces, man. While it's a comprehensive look at the mysteries of Lake Ontario, we had to wonder, how mysterious are these mysteries? So we figured that it's our responsibility as the host of Great Lakes Lore to compare Cochrane's work with other accounts of the events he uses to prove his point about the Marysburgh Vortex. So is Cochrane presenting these events, often disastrous or tragic, in a full and fair way, or is he manipulating the narratives? We're going to read these disasters to you. Well, Aaron will, and then I will provide the newspaper, other accounts, whatever, and you listeners will get both sides of the story.
It's a real Mulder Scully moment here as I declare Cochrane's sometimes vague and loopy account, and Sam says the person who was there said blah. So okay, let's start off in 1883 with a ship called the Quinlan, a ship carrying a load of coal. It left port in Oswego, New York. Its destination was the North Shore of Lake Ontario. That was all it was given, the North Shore. Its course took it straight through the middle of the triangle comprising the so-called Marysburgh Vortex. According to Cochrane, those who witnessed the violent events that befell the ship and survived to tell the tale revealed that the eastern end of the lake was inhabited by unknown forces that still inhabit the region today. Soon after setting out, the Quinlan ran into some freezing fog, and frost began to form all over the ship. Then snow began, and Cochrane called the snowfall strange, but he doesn't explain what's strange about it.
Meteorological events are always strange.
It's snow on the Great Lakes in the autumn, right? This is the least strange thing I can think of in a lot of ways. So the snow is piling up. The crew is struggling to clear the decks, and waves begin battering the ship. And the compass stops working. The ship's crew were sailing blind, struggling to keep the ship afloat, and Cochrane explained that the ship was now under control of other forces which refused to release their grip. The ship crashed into the shore at Marysburgh, the mast snapping, the hull being smashed open. Onlookers on the shore tried to rescue as many members of the crew as possible, but only a few survived. Cochrane relates that the survivors claimed the ship had been gripped by, in their words, some odd attraction. He provides no citation for this quotation.
Oh, that rhymes.
It does. I didn't mean it to.
History poems. All right, so now let's look at what folks at the time said. The website Maritime History of the Great Lakes presents transcripts of newspaper clippings covering the wreck of the Quinlan, more properly called the Eliza Quinlan. First of all, the wreck was in December of 1882, not the autumn of 1883, which explains a little some problems that we had initially while doing research. The official report from the Department of Marine and Fisheries Statement of Loss stated, stranded December 4th, 1882 on Poplar Bar, Prince Edward County during snow and fog, and became a total loss. Property loss, $1,500. The earliest reports claimed that all hands were saved. The most thorough account is from a book called Canvas and Steam on Quint Waters by Willis Metcalf. The book contains a retelling from the grandson of the captain of the Eliza Quinlan. He wrote, "It froze hard that night, and it was late the next morning when the tugs broke the ice to tow the vessel out into the lake. By that time, it had become very foggy, and within a short time, it started to snow and blow from the southwest. About 2:30 o'clock in the afternoon, the schooner ran aground on Poplar Bar, 3 miles west of Point Travers Light. It was supposed that her compass, through some attraction, led her off course. The Quinlan was stranded on the rocks for years, with several attempts being made to make her seaworthy again. Those attempts failed, and she eventually succumbed to the elements." So there in that description, we have a possible source of the attraction line that Cochrane wrote, although it's missing the word strange, and comes from the captain's grandson, rather than sort of this visage he made of the bedraggled sailors that were hauled off the freezing lake. Granted, this is less evocative, but far more what's not respectable, but citation worthy, I guess. We found no indication that lives were lost when the Quinlan ran aground. Compendiums of shipping wrecks we looked at specified deaths, and none were listed with the Quinlan. As boring as footnotes are, we would have appreciated Cochrane providing some, at least, to support the story that he shared, because it certainly doesn't seem to be the one that we found when we turned to the original sources.
No, and something that I just realized as you were saying that is the line, the strange attraction line, or the attraction line. Cochrane makes it sound like they were referring to the ship was drawn by some strange attraction. And the actual quotation makes it clear that the compass was subject to the attraction, not a force drawing the whole ship off course. It was just they didn't know where to go, which is a different sort of thing. Entirely.
Right. Yeah. And so listeners, remember this note about the compass, because this is all going to come back later on in the story. So now we'll turn to the wreck of the Bavaria from 1889.
All right. So the Bavaria. In May 1889, the Bavaria failed to return to port. Another ship, the Armenia, set out in search of her. They found the Bavaria run aground on Galoo Island, a small shoal. But there was no response to the rescue ship's hails, and no one was on deck. The only sound that came from the strangely silent ship, Cochrane reports, was the uneasy creaking of her timbers, as the long swells from the lake nudged her to and fro, swaying her masts like giant crosses. According to Cochrane, a dark frown appeared on the face of the Armenia's captain as
How would he know this?
I know. It's
creative nonfiction at its worst.
Right. I mean, I can't hate it too much, but yeah. So, Captain with the Dark Frown, he and some sailors board the Bavaria to investigate. The crew had vanished without trace. And this wasn't the only mystery. The ship was seaworthy once freed from the shoal. Why had the crew abandoned the ship? Where had they gone? Clues on the ship, fresh-baked bread just out of the oven, a small repair job left unfinished, indicated that whatever happened had occurred very quickly. He's making it sound like they were raptured or something. It's like everything was left and everybody just, went. So the Armenia returned to port and reported what they'd found. And Cochrane claims that while people speculated about what had happened to the crew, it also raised questions about what had happened to others who had vanished on Lake Ontario. It raised, he said, questions of other dark mysteries that have plagued this region of the continent since earliest times.
Ooh.
Many had tried to solve the enigma of Lake Ontario, but they all failed. Some investigators, supposedly, claimed that an invisible, unnatural, and bizarre force had driven the crew insane, causing them to seek escape, possibly even suicide. He provides no source for that. Nothing made sense. The lifeboat was missing, so the crew had fled. But why? There had been a storm, but if they thought they were in danger of sinking, why were they baking bread or doing non-critical repairs? Other stories, Cochrane says, would surface. A ship captain and a lighthouse keeper each saw a single lifeboat with 2 men in it that did not respond to any attempts to help. The 2 men sat as if hypnotized, staring blankly. When last seen, they were sitting immobile, as the oars they were pulling drew them to their doom. Finally, Cochrane says, in over 100 years, no one has come any closer to finding a solution to this mystery.
Well, I'll tell you, the authors of the Kingston News on May 29th, 1889 had several theories. Far more practical than Cochrane's as to what happened to
we'll see about that.
The Bavaria. So this newspaper article, like I said, May 29th, 1889, theorizes what happened to the crew of 8 that were on the ship and sort of plays out what had happened. So the morning of May 28th, the Bavaria was in a tow line being led by the Calvin. And in order, it was the Calvin, then the Valencia. It's spelled with a T, which makes me want to say Valencia, but Valentia?
I would say Valentia.
I guess. It's weird. Bavaria, and then the Norway. The Norway was the last ship in the line. And according to the newspaper article, the sea was running tremendously high and tons of water were thrown on deck. So the Valentia's line broke first from the Calvin, and then the Bavaria broke from that. The Norway had to cut loose from the Bavaria to save itself, and actually the Bavaria does end up ramming into the Norway. The next morning, the other 3 ships made it in, but the Bavaria wasn't there. The Norway was in terrible shape, so this gives some idea as to the state of the lake at this time.
Was it in terrible shape because it got rammed by the Bavaria?
I mean, I think it's a combination of the two. They talked about everything that was sort of all askew and, whatever. The articles that I read made it sound like it wasn't a horrible ramming, breaking sides and things like that, but things knocked around a little bit. Well, not a little bit, but
boat equivalent of a fender bender.
Yeah, kind of, I guess. The Armenia went out to assist and helped tow in the Norway. It also found the Bavaria on Gallu Island. One hypothesis that seems to make the most sense is that Captain Marshall of the Bavaria tried to move the lumber it was carrying to help ride out the storm and was washed overboard in the process. The article noted that his papers were found in his cabin, and a captain generally wouldn't abandon ship without his papers, at least this guy, they said. And he also always had an axe, mounted in a certain place in his cabin, and that axe was gone, which led them to believe that he could have taken that and was, trying to do his thing on deck when he was washed over. The crew then, lacking their captain, decided to leave in the ship's boat, which was a bad idea. There was a report from a lighthouse that said that the lighthouse men saw a yawl of men overturned. So no 2 people sitting hypnotized in a ghost boat. Many in the article that they talked to, it was a really long article with different pieces to the story, said that the ship's men didn't need to leave because the ship was full of white pine and would have been fine, which aligns with, what Cochrane wrote, saying that, the ship was in fine shape. It didn't need to be abandoned. But perhaps these men, they didn't know what to do. Their captain was gone. Maybe they weren't as seasoned of shipmen and didn't know what to do.
So, a question from a landlubber. What about white pine means the ship would have been fine? Just the weight of it wasn't bad enough to tip it over?
That's just what they said. I mean, wood floats, right?
That's what I was thinking. More as opposed to a hold full of coal,
right?
Or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay, that's
yeah.
Okay.
That's
makes
a guess.
sense.
I didn't look into it.
That's what
my mind told me. But
okay, me too. I thought it was a buoyancy issue.
Yes.
So.
An article that I found from the same day, May 29th, 1899, from the Oswego Daily Palladium, said that the Bavaria had fallen into the trough of the seas and remained there. So the skipper of the Calvin, remember this was the head of the tow line, said that nobody on the Bavaria made any effort to raise sail or turn the craft about. As the seas rolled across the deck, he said he could see that the Bavaria was starting to take on water. So sensing the vessel was in some kind of trouble, the Calvin turned around and drew abreast of the Bavaria, where the captain hailed the boat, expecting Captain John Marshall and his crew to help attach a new hawser. But there was no response. The drifting schooner appeared deserted, so already at this point, everybody's gone. The Calvin stood by, blowing its whistle until the Bavaria drifted too close to Gallu Island and eventually grounded. Then there was one other sort of odd note that I found. It was in an excerpt from, there was an excerpt from a June 1889 New York Times article that recounts that a witness reported seeing Captain Marshall clinging to a yawl. But as I mentioned, the Kingston article says that Marshall wouldn't have left the ship. He was a better seaman and wouldn't have left his papers behind. The website that contained this article also had an odd note. It said that someone had claimed to have found in a note in a bottle that said, "Captain of Bavaria, help, the ship is sinking. All have been washed overboard but me. I expect my turn will come next. About 100 yards off Galloop," which is spelled wrong, Island, Lake Ontario. And that didn't really make sense to me. This was not part of the New York Times article itself, but when you listen to all these accounts, everything happened so fast that it doesn't really seem that there would have been any time to throw a message in a bottle asking for help. I mean, there's another message in a bottle you'll hear about soon that seems a little more realistic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Here's the thing about a message in a bottle as a rescue thing. It's like, I'm going to drown soon. If you find this bottle, what?
Yeah.
What are you going to do when you find the bottle? Hope he's still alive?
Right.
I mean, who's going to find this bottle? I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sam, since you just went through all this and you were doing the research on this part, I wonder if you'll agree. Cochrane simplified the heck out of this story. He did not talk about the tow line. He did not talk about the conditions, really. He was just like, well, there was a ship and out of nowhere, they just decided to jump overboard and no one knows why. It's like, no, it was a multi-car pileup on a lake.
Right.
And it got chaotic. And when you don't know what's going on and you don't have a leader there to direct you, and you might not be an experienced sailor, maybe you panic and abandon ship in a dumb situation or a bad situation.
Yeah, I mean, I can see how maybe if you didn't know, being in the smaller boat might seem like you had the better chance than like, oh my gosh, I think the ship's going to go under, or something like that. So you do that hoping that you'll, reach someplace. Maybe they were hoping to reach Gallu Island or something with the small boat that they were on. I don't know, but yeah, I mean, it took me reading through this a couple of times to like understand all of the points of this long story, and I've even simplified it as well, because you don't need that many details to understand that it's complicated and messy.
And poorly reported by Cochrane.
Yes.
In 1900, 3 ships, the Picton, the Minas, and the Acacia, all left port. The Minas and the Acacia had the Picton in view when suddenly the Picton vanished. For 2 hours, the ships searched for the Picton, but the ship and crew were gone. A few days later, a young boy found a message in a bottle. It was signed by the captain of the Picton. The note explained that he had lashed himself to his son so they would be found together. The mystery of this is that if the ship had vanished almost instantly, as the other ships reported, the captain would not have had the chance to write such a note, and maybe not even a chance to lash himself to his son. Perhaps he was trapped inside his ship underwater with a small amount of air and time to compose the message, Cochrane says.
And this one's messy. So I'm going to give you articles out of chronological order because this is the order that the newspapers.com search machine showed them to me. But you'll get the idea that there are conflicting reports about this story in particular, but still more detail than what Cochrane shared. The Democrat and Chronicle of Rochester, New York reported on July 27th, 1900 of the disappearance of the coal schooner Picton. Captain Savage of another coal schooner, the Annie Minnis, said that prior to leaving, he and Captain John Sidney of the Picton said they would race across the lake to their destination. A little Lake Ontario drag race.
Zoom.
So the newspaper says, the vessels left the harbor early in the morning of July 6th, just a few hours before the bursting of a furious storm over the lake. Savage reportedly saw the Picton ahead of it at about 10:30, and then a few minutes later, when he looked back in the direction, it was gone. Savage sailed over in that direction, but there was no evidence of it. He believes that in the strong gale that was blowing, the vessel opened a seam and was carried to its doom by the cargo of the coal. Coal's heavier, coal sinks.
It's physics.
The article says that this is the first bit of evidence shed on the mystery of the disaster, and the crew of 5 all perished. Next, an article from the Buffalo Evening News of July 3rd said the wreck happened on the 3rd, not the 6th, and also said that there was a crew of 6 that perished and listed all of their names. A later article from mid-August 1900 in that same Democrat and Chronicle from Rochester, New York, confirms the discovery of a note from the captain, but it also says the ship sank on June 29th with 7 men on board. And this note read, John Sidley, not, what did the first article say? Sidney. So now
Sidney.
He's Sidley. John Sidley, captain of schooner Picton, in great peril. Expect to sink at any minute. Goodbye to all friends. Finder, please report this to my wife. Now, this seems more of a legitimate kind. Like, this is like, I just watched The Patriot last night, and Mel Gibson is like, Harry, give this note to my children. Like, if I die in the battle. Like, but still, if disaster is that fast that the other ship just, I don't know. But even at the time, they were reporting that there was a letter. So that's where Cochrane
but
got
not
the
that he was
info.
lashed to his son.
No, there was somewhere else that I did see that I thought. We have one more article, so maybe it's in that, or maybe Cochrane made that up. I don't remember. Another article from the Democrat and Chronicle on July 2nd. So now we're going back further in time, which truly would be before the sinking happened, right? I've confused myself now.
The timeline is strange.
It is strange. It keeps changing. There's a slightly different story, and this came from the captain of the Acacia. So this is the first time that we're hearing about the Acacia in these newspaper reports. So Captain Byron Bogard claims to have been ahead of the Picton and saw it flounder along the south shore of Lake Ontario. Quote, when the captain of the Acacia last saw the Picton, she was struggling hard in the seas with only a small piece of canvas left. The schooner finally disappeared from view. Captain Bogard believes she went to the bottom. She is owned by Captain Sibley of Belleville, whose wife and children are said to have been on board. It was just his son on board in the other articles. So we have a few more things changing. A lot changes in the story of the Picton.
Okay, so we got Sidney, Sidley, and Sibley.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
We've got, I've been lashed to my son in the note. I've not been lashed to anybody in the other note, but please tell my wife. And then third, we have his wife was on board. So
his son was on board.
Right.
For sure. But
the son was on board for sure.
The wife.
In every case.
Yes.
In every case. Okay. I didn't notice the son in.
I don't think I noted it in the first newspaper article because I didn't know it was going to be important because they didn't make it important in the first article. And I wanted to share the developments as they came, like take you through my weird research. And then I was going crazy.
I'm trying to track this in my brain. So, I mean, I'm imagining a situation where on the in the third scenario is the correct one. And they just didn't report that he lashed himself to his son, but his wife was there. I think he had a second secret family, and he meant, tell my other wife that I have lashed myself to my son, and you'll doubtless find our bloated corpses on a beach somewhere.
God. Sturgeon stew.
Yeah.
I made that up. Isn't that great?
That is great.
But either way, the waters were rough. The Annie Minnis saw it, then didn't see it. It was quick, it was rapid, it was down. But I don't understand how there can be different accounts of what day it happened.
Right.
That's the really weird one to me. I was like, is this the same ship? I'm not really sure. But it is.
What I'm wondering is, did Cochrane have access to all of these stories and then just pick the elements of each one
maybe
he thought would make a good one. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
I've got all these sources. I will find like the best fit line through all of these weird contradictory narratives,
Mm-hmm.
which isn't the worst approach.
No.
But I think out of all of them, I think this is the one that just demonstrates how quickly things can go bad when you're on a body of water like this.
Yeah, and the other thing that I think this highlights is that news reporting wasn't stellar back then.
No.
I mean, so when you're trying to do this kind of research, you have to be critical of what you're reading. And obviously it's easy when, all of the newspaper articles say the same thing. But in this case, when you're getting these conflicting accounts, because maybe you're talking to a person a month later, in the case of the one article that came out mid-August, and he's like, oh yeah, back then, what was it, the beginning of July sometime? And he picks a day. But news travels slowly, and it's a different world. And so you can't account that the people writing this article saw the event and were reporting it just as it was happening, the same way we hear news today.
So those are some accounts of some of the shipwrecks and mysteries related to those, mysteries in quotes, that Cochrane relates. When we come back, we're going to look at some aircraft losses and some weird stuff and some explanations from Cochrane and from the world of science about what might account for some of the strange things going on in the Marysburgh Vortex.
Our next episode is going to be some ghosts in Minnesota. Some to be determined ghosts in Minnesota. We've got a few things on the radar. We just got to pin it down. So
yeah, narrow down the ghosts.
Yeah.
We'll have them audition.
Are you a good enough ghost?
You'll
have to see.
So what do you do when you haunt? What's your backstory? Was there a murder involved? Is it tragic? Is it romantic? You can follow us on social media. We are at Great Lakes Lore on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, and we'd love you to comment and ask questions and all of that stuff.
Great Lakes Lore is also on Patreon. We are under Chizo Media. It's a combined Patreon account with Great Lakes Lore and The Saucer Life, Aaron's other podcast. And there we have bonus episodes, footage from field trips, research blog posts, and all kinds of extra fun goodies for those who support us. So thanks to everybody who has done so already. And, if it's within your means and you want more of us in your life, you can check out the tiers that we have available for you there.
So it's time for our book discussion of the month, and it's April. It's a new month. Sam, do we have a theme? What are you reading?
Yeah, so the topic for this month is a book recommended by a fellow legender, so somebody else who listens to Astonishing Legends, because if you forgot, this is the Astonishing Legends sort of book challenge for the year. And I am reading Ghostland. It has a subtitle. I don't have it in front of me, by Colin Dickey. And so it's looking at sort of America's fascination with, interest, whatever, in ghosts and hauntings throughout the country. And I'm 25, 30 pages in, and there's some interesting stuff and some stuff that's annoying me. So I will share more on that when I can see if it's actually something that will trend throughout the book.
Well, Sam is the only Astonishing Legends person I know, at least that I know of. And I was going to read the Neil Gaiman
Norse mythology
book, and I haven't started it yet. I think I am going to do that. Okay, so let's get back to the Marysburgh Vortex. So aircraft losses, that's a big Bermuda Triangle thing, and it's sort of a thing in the Marysburgh Vortex, Lake Ontario Triangle as well. Gourley's book on the Great Lakes Triangle has relatively few cases concerning Lake Ontario. The handful of cases he does discuss are very short descriptions of aircraft mysteries. For example, there's the case of Flight 18112, a CF-101 jet of the Canadian Air Force, which should have been called the Royal Canadian Air Force, but we'll let him slide this time. It happened on August 23rd, 1954. And the pilot was flying over the northern shore of Lake Ontario, and he bailed out. He reported that the aircraft had become impossible to control. And Gurley says that the cause of this is officially secret. The file is secret, but he has seen the secret file. He doesn't explain how he did this. And according to Gurley, the secret file states that the scientists who studied the case couldn't determine what caused the issue. This, he says, is amazing because flight investigators are very good detectives who always solve things, which is a kind of weak explanation. And most of the cases Gurley cites are like this. A plane crashes or disappears, and the cause is undetermined or simply not made public, which is usually the case in incidents where military flights go down. And that undetermined or non-public nature leaves a lot of room for speculation on what might have happened. And a lot of times he doesn't have explanations. He just has sort of, clearly something did happen because they aren't telling us what did happen. So it must be something they don't want us to know about. It's very indistinct, very vague.
In his book, Cochrane focused much less on aircraft disappearances than he did on ship-based mysteries and disasters. But he did cover a few interesting aircraft disappearances. While Gurley focused on the fairly dry details of the cases, Cochrane has a more lurid approach, which I feel like you can expect given what we've discussed about the shipwrecks. He likes to put the word accident in sarcasm quotes, and while he finds the same cases with the same undetermined findings as Gurley does, Cochrane says things like this. While some aircraft in this region encounter invisible objects or forces, others appear to drop into a well and are sucked straight down in a vertical plunge into the earth, which is just an overwrought way of saying plane crashes in different ways and more flourishing language. Many of the plane crash or disappearance stories are very similar, and honestly, the way he writes them, they're just not as interesting as the shipwreck stories.
And there's not a lot of official accounts we can look at that would say much different. We've got a plane that goes down and the cause is undetermined, or instrument failure, or pilot disorientation, or things like that. And there's really no differences in the narrative between what Cochrane or Gurley says and what the official record says. It's just that in the case of aircraft, because there's less documentation and things are strange, they're able to sort of read more into it. It's sort of why I feel that the shipwreck stuff is more interesting.
And I mean, when you think about it, the airplane stuff comes much later when, like, instruments reporting news, all of that is much different than late 19th century, turn of the century newspaper reporting as well. So it seems like that would make a difference into how you're putting a story together.
Absolutely. But there's some stuff that's weirder than shipwrecks that Cochrane gets into. He also devotes several chapters to other phenomenon that he tenuously connects to the weirdness of the Marysburgh Vortex. There's a story of Samuel de Champlain drawing a map of the St. Lawrence River that contained two large islands that were not there when later French explorers arrived decades later. Cochrane urges exploration of the riverbed to determine whether these islands might have been submerged due to some strange unknown event. He also wonders whether these missing islands could be connected to local native legends of the city of Sagana, a mysterious place where men flew in the sky like birds. Now, other references to Sagana are few and far between. A book from 1937 called Mining in Ontario reports that Jacques Cartier reported finding gold from that city, but the authors acknowledge that the claims place a heavy tax on our credulity. Amazingly, to us anyway, is that Cochrane does not mention this legends of Mishapashu, a water spirit that became known as the Mazenau Lake Monster. Native peoples would offer tobacco to the monster before setting out across the lake, lest the creature whack their canoes with his tail. Sightings of something have been reported as late as the 20th century. And it's weird that he doesn't talk about this because even though that lake is a ways from Lake Ontario, Cochrane brings it up because there are some very old petroglyphs near the lake. And Cochrane wonders if they could be connected to the lost city of Sagana. So I think it's just a huge missed opportunity to not bring the supposed lake monster into this story as well. Maybe he thought that was too far out or something. I don't know.
Cochrane also explores the connection between strangeness on the eastern end of Lake Ontario and psychic or spiritual abilities and energies. He discusses dowsers who have supposedly used their abilities to sense gravitational anomalies that scientists have also found through more conventional means. He also brings in a startling array of religious or spiritual events or personalities as part of the supposed effects of the Marysburgh Triangle region. He notes that Joseph Smith had his encounter that led to the creation of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints just 15 miles from the shores of Lake Ontario. Could there have been a connection? He also brings up the story of the Fox sisters who were in the area and played a crucial role in popularizing spiritualism in the 19th century America. The only relevance they have to the wider story is geographical proximity. So it's clear that he's taking anything that could smack of odd or supernatural or paranormal or whatever that happened anywhere near here and just threw it into the mixed bag of of these mysteries around Lake Ontario.
He also throws in a number of other things, brief references to ghost ships and ghost fleets, and he even somehow brings in the cattle mutilation phenomenon that got a great deal of press attention in the 1970s. Although he doesn't connect this directly to the events of the Marysburgh Triangle. In fact, the cattle mutilations he talks about are in New Mexico. Honestly, I think he just wanted to talk about cattle mutilations for a couple of pages.
He's like, this is my one shot at writing my paranormal book, and I'm going to throw out all my opinions about everything.
It does seem like that. And he does mention a number of UFO cases, going back to reports of mysterious lights in colonial times and during the early European settlement of Lake Ontario, and stretches all the way forward to contemporary accounts of UFOs that were investigated by various UFO organizations and researchers. As with all other aspects of the book, there are a lot of examples, and to catalog them here would be kind of tedious. They're almost entirely nocturnal lights. There's no literal structured flying saucer craft or anything like that. Now, I'm a UFO guy, but I have to acknowledge that reading paragraph after paragraph of descriptions of an orange light, a red light, a glowing blue light gets old. The most interesting UFO-related thing Cochrane mentions is a theory presented by the revered, among paranormal types, author and scientist Ivan T. Sanderson in his book Invisible Residents. Sanderson theorized that the number of UFO sightings near bodies of water, including reports of unidentified submerged objects, or USOs, could indicate that there were UFO bases below the surface of lakes and oceans. And Lake Ontario has been, for a while now, the rumored site of an underwater UFO base. There are a lot of websites that discuss this, but we have a better source, Commander X.
So, who was Commander X? He is a former military and intelligence operative privy to the hidden truth behind the world's most perplexing mysteries. He has risked his life many times to bring the truth to the public. But not really. It's just a pen name used by a number of UFO conspiracy New Age writers from the 1980s up to the past couple of years. It was spearheaded and published by the late Timothy Green Beckley, a longtime researcher, writer, and publisher of some of the most outlandish and entertaining material on the fringe scene. In the 1990s book Underground Alien Bases, there is a chapter on Canadian UFO bases. Commander X covers a number of UFOs seen over Lake Ontario, with many being witnessed as rising up out of the lake or diving beneath the water. This means, of course, that there must be a UFO base under the lake. In fact, Commander X says, if there isn't an underground UFO base on Lake Ontario, I'll eat my green beret.
Another interesting story related by Commander X involves a man named Ernest who lived in Toronto. In 1979, Ernest discovered a vast cave network underneath the city. He discovered it accidentally when he entered a small opening off Parliament Street while looking for a kitten. Inside the cave, he saw orange and red slanted eyes. They belonged to a creature that was long and thin, almost like a monkey, 3 feet long, large teeth, weighing maybe 30 pounds with slate gray fur. It hissed, "Go away," to Ernest, who did so quickly. According to several Oriental masters, the creature Ernest saw may have been, it was 1990, may have been the sacred Tibetan Kadoma, the guardian of the gateways to the cities of Shambhala. They are very positive people, but will destroy negative trespassers.
Now, and why were they in Lake Ontario?
I'm going to say that right now.
Oh, sorry.
What Ernest found might have been connected to a vast underground city. This city, built and since abandoned by the ancient L race, contained massive magnetic machines that still exist underneath Toronto. These machines have caused various anomalous activities in the surface world. Pictures on walls swing around. Objects move around untouched. Brakes and vital parts on cars and motorcycles fail and create fatal accidents. According to Commander X's sources, the machinery is under the corner of Gerrard and Church Streets, an intersection that had the highest rate of accidents in Toronto, supposedly. So it's under Lake Ontario because it extends, it's this part of the city that extends under Toronto and throughout the whole region. So there's an entrance in Toronto to this giant underground city.
Why is the city with the Tibetan monkey god underneath Canada and a Great Lake?
Oh, because all of these things are connected. There's a worldwide network of underground tunnels leading to mysterious places like Agartha and the lost city of Shambhala. You can get to them from a number of places. You can go to Mount Shasta in California and get there through there too. But this is closer for if we want to do a Patreon field trip to an opening off Parliament Street where a kitten might have gone back in 1979. That's like 4 hours away. I'm sure, and they have high-speed underground tunnel cars that will take you to Tibet and Mount Shasta.
Is this somebody's fever dream? What is this?
You think that's bad? Wait till I tell you about the Diro that could also be behind this.
It's just a Monday. This is a lot
We don't have time for the Diro now, but you might hear me tell Sam about the Diro at a later time. So what's really going on here? Because I'm a little bit skeptical of the ancient city of Shambhala. I'm
skeptical of all of this. And I like weird stuff, but this is too ship sink, man.
I don't know what to tell you. If you're not down with the ancient city of Shambhala, well, I'm not down with Shambhala, but something's going on at Mount Shasta in California. I'll tell you that right now. But maybe there's a more realistic explanation. What do we think?
Yeah, so let's dive into Cochrane's explanation, and then I'm going to provide a very rational explanation that I found.
So Cochrane has some ideas. His most sensible idea is that there was a 1950 joint scientific effort by the American and Canadian governments to investigate magnetic anomalies in the area. And as Cochrane describes it, the researchers discovered areas of reduced binding in the atmosphere near the shore of the lake. These were pillar-like columns up to 1,000 feet across and reaching thousands of feet above the surface. The forces binding matter together were disrupted on the molecular level. Even more troubling, these columns were not stationary. They moved, making such information impossible to put on navigational charts. Cochrane claims that this disturbing atmospheric effect that ripped apart matter should have launched further investigations, but no such investigations happened. And he puts sort of a conspiratorial spin on this. Why didn't they look into this further? He's vague on the details about this study, but from what we could find, he's probably referring to something called Project Magnet, which I think Sam is going to talk about in a bit. And he's getting a lot of the details about Project Magnet kind of wrong. The main theory he puts forth is that these occurrences in these zones of mystery, not just Marysburgh, but Bermuda Triangle and a dozen others around the world, are places where the boundaries between dimensions are thinner and more permeable than most. This may allow objects we identify as UFOs to appear, may allow for the manifestation of strange mental abilities, like starting the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or lead to encounters with beings from outside our plane of reality, or affect the physical world in violent ways, or cause ships to crash or simply disappear. Cochrane is, of course, not the first to talk about these ideas, and he does credit John Keel with being one of the researchers who explored these things. The strange energies released by these areas might, he argues, represent a solution to the wide variety of phenomenon he describes in his book. He also relates these things to topics like telluric earth energies and ley lines, the idea that there are these streams of power that are part of the earth that can have strange effects on what we consider the normal physical process.
All right. Now check this out. According to a thorough post I found on a blog, Ottawa Rewind. I have a problem saying Ottawa Rewind. There's something with the W's.
My problem is that in Canada they pronounce Ottawa.
Ottawa Rewind. It's just like there's something with the W's that
Yeah, it is a little weird.
According to a thorough post on the blog Ottawa Rewind. Got it. In 1950, the Canadian government started Project Magnet to investigate why ships seem to go wonky in this area of Lake Ontario. They investigated the Earth's magnetic fields, increased technology, and worked by groups like NOAA and the National Geophysical Data Center revealed a circular depression with a ridge surrounding it, now referred to as the Charity Shoal structure. So under the lake, at the bottom of the lake, there is a circular depression with a ridge around it. Further study of it in the 21st century dates it as being over 400 million years old. The ring has a high magnetic field, and the center of it has a magnetic low. So obviously that's going to throw compasses, navigational tools, whatever. It's going to make them go weird. Dr. Richard Hurd, the retired curator of the National Meteorite Collection of the Geological Survey of Canada, says that this could have been caused by a collision, a meteor collision, and it could have brought up molten material at the ridge. Additionally, meteors are generally of two types. They can be stony or they can be made of iron nickel, which obviously would have magnetic properties to it. And this is very similar to the Barringer crater in Nevada. And so there's a very simple geological explanation as to why there is this area at the bottom of Lake Ontario that causes a compass to go weird or causes other strange things to happen. And although the ship anomalies have decreased as, GPS and things have gotten better and rely on satellites and not magnets and things, there are still occasionally ships that get lost in the area. As recently as 2013, a stray sailboat was found drifting around in the area without a crew, and they were never found. And so I think this just goes to show that there are very explainable reasons why things can be weird once we have the technology and the tools to figure them out.
Yeah, and the Project Magnet thing, did anything in your reading that you did that mentioned Project Magnet indicate zones of reduced binding where matter was flying apart?
No.
Me neither. I did some looking because we were independently discovering Project Magnet without each other knowing we were discovering Project Magnet. And all the stuff I found was about this. It was about navigation anomalies and also radio communication screw-ups.
And the U.S. actually launched its own Project Magnet just after Canada started its own. And then the article that I had just then followed sort of the Canadian developments because obviously it was a Canadian blog. But they're like, then the Americans started looking into it too.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I think that's a cool and very fascinating reason why, you combine that with just like the danger of being on the Great Lakes. And that just explains a lot, I think.
Yeah. And I think people don't realize just how dangerous those lakes are, because like you said, they are inland seas. There are even the small ones like Lake Ontario are absolutely massive. And it's especially in an age of sail, in an age before when your navigational system was a magnet and you had no way to know what kind of meteorite was under the ocean that could affect that. Yes, it would be unexplained, why that happened.
Yeah.
Not to mention that aircraft go down all the time, especially back in the 40s and 50s. Especially a lot of these aircraft cases are small single engine planes with one person in them.
I mean, and when you think about like the fact that in as late as the 1970s, a storm took out the Edmund Fitzgerald, like in Lake Superior, in a way that we still don't have a concrete answer for. It's just not that weird.
Actually, that leads me to a question I have, a
Okay.
concluding question I have. How do we feel about the exploitation of actual maritime or aviation tragedies as somehow paranormal or anomalous when evidence fails to point to anything actually anonymous? And the reason I ask that now is because both of these books, Gurley's book and Cochrane's book, brought up the story of the Edmund Fitzgerald.
Oh.
Did not suggest anything anomalous had happened, just that it was very sudden. And it felt very much like, well, it's 1977/1980. Gotta mention this ship. This just happened. I've got no way to connect it to anything weird, which is supposedly what I'm trying to do. But it's like, oh, Edmund Fitzgerald, that was sad. Remember the song? So how do we feel about this? I don't think exploitation is the wrong word here, but
no, I
sort
don't
of like,
either.
oh, people died. Well, was it a vortex? Things like that. I don't know. I feel weird about it.
Yeah, I don't like it because I think it takes away from, the true nature and danger that people put themselves in as they are doing their work, have done their work for centuries along the Great Lakes. Just passing it off as weird matter combusting or like portals or the thinning of the divide between dimensions or whatever it might be that a person is leaning to. I think that takes so much away from the richness of the human experience and the tragedy. And it truly, looking at all of the things that Cochrane's book brings up, it really feels like I said earlier, this is my one shot to make my weird paranormal book. And so I'm going to throw in everything that I possibly can without care as to what really happened here. And it's only when we not just as historians, but when we as people know what truly happened in the past that we can appreciate it and appreciate the lives of these people who passed away tragically and did the work that they did and stuff. I don't know.
Or survived and were reported as being dead by Cochrane in one of his books.
Yes, that's true. The one ship, yes.
Yeah. So, we're able to poke holes in some of Cochrane's stories with a Google search or two, but the internet gets a lot of criticism for making it easy to spread dubious stories. But how has it enabled critical thinkers to thoroughly check stories like these? I think that's sort of the flip side the positive side of the internet that we have, because it's easy to say, Cochrane, you dope, but how hard would it have been to get hands on some of these sources that we had, books that were long out of print that catalog shipwrecks, newspapers. And, I have a feeling, this is just a supposition on my part, I have a feeling that Cochrane sort of got the deal for this book and they were like, this triangle stuff is big right now. We need it in 3 months. So there's, which doesn't make it right, but it's amazing how many resources we have now that we kind of take for granted.
Yeah, at like public history conferences that I've gone to, we have conversations about how, whether it's students or just researchers or whatever, when they're using the internet, they need to learn to evaluate sources and understand the kind of source that they're looking at. But the thing that we always come back to in these conversations is but the internet lets us do so much. As museums and libraries and all of these repositories are digitizing their collections and making sources and pictures of artifacts and all of these things available to people who want to use them for educational purposes or just personal enrichment or whatever it might be, all of the knowledge is at our fingertips. And sure, Cochrane, what year did he write this book? I forget.
80.
Yeah, so he didn't have that that level of access to these things, and so the research wouldn't have been as easy, and we don't know what his background is, so we don't know like even what could have compelled him to write the book.
He was a freelance journalist with a deep interest in UFOs and the paranormal. So, he's coming at this from, an angle of, I've got my ideas about weird stuff, and
I'm not going to look at any other sources.
Right. Right. So, one last question. What's more damaging? The blatantly outrageous stories that come out of the Commander X genre of paranormal writing, or books like Cochrane's that are inaccurate or incomplete, but based on sort of solid historical foundations, things that sound history-ish.
Yeah, I think the thing that looks closest to credible but isn't credible is more dangerous than the thing that is very obviously not credible. I mean, I've never heard of these weird things that you brought up in this episode. Some of them, the Commander X things and Shambhala and whatever. But anybody could pick up a book and think like, oh, look, this is researched, and not understand that good research has footnotes and talks about the sources that they use. And so it would be easy for someone to think, well, this is a credible thing. It's in a book, as opposed to like, oh, this weird wackadoo posted in this chat room.
Hey, that Commander X thing was a book. That was a book.
Oh,
with pages.
That's true. That's true, unfortunately.
So I agree with you generally, but to Cochrane's credit, I'm going to say he did something that a lot of books like his don't do. There's an index.
Okay.
Which is, look, don't discount how awesome it is for books to have indexes.
Oh, no, I love a good index. No, an index is amazing. I agree.
Very, very helpful. And
I wrote my thesis with an index, practically.
I will say that having done indexes for a number of books, it is the most soul-sucking, tedious, horrible thing on earth to compile an index. I hated it. But I don't hate the Marysburgh Vortex and the stories that come out of it, and even the real explanations that we found, I thought were interesting and thought-provoking and fun, fascinating stories of what things were like sailing ships across Lake Ontario.
Yeah, I mean, it provided a really rich look into the maritime history of one of the Great Lakes that I don't actually know a lot about, because Michigan doesn't touch it.
Yeah.
I forget about that one out there. All right. Well, I think that about wraps it up.
I think it does.
All right. Thanks for listening.
The Lake Ontario Triangle was written and produced by Aaron Gullius and Samantha Engel.
Our music is by Raphael Crux.
Great Lakes Lore is a Chizo Media production. Chizo Media. Our heart is with the people.
Until next time, don't get lost in the lore.